I have a book coming out, and the irony is perfect because Adrian is one of the editors at Northwestern Press. It's called Embracing the Void, Rethinking the Origin of the Sacred. And it precisely tackles this problematic of a Lacanian conception of religion, which Lacan himself not only never wrote, but liked to remind us shouldn't be attempted. He basically says, don't go there. That's all dragons. I want to try to do that. I want to try to fill in what I think is at least a meaningful attempt at saying something general about the religious impulse from a Lacanian point of view, leaving aside whether or not he or Adrian will completely approve of it. And it's centered also on another enigmatic point in Lacan's teaching, really important, not just for Adrian and I think anybody who really reads Lacan carefully, the problematic of das Ding that's introduced in the ethics seminar, but then almost completely left out going forward from that. It gets very little mention in subsequent seminars. In fact, it virtually disappears from the discussions about Antigone in the second half of the seventh seminar, and makes one wonder what really was Lacan's commitment. How far did he follow through on the very conspicuous emphasis that he puts on the concept in the first half of this ethics seminar? The complex of the Nebenmensch in Freud's Project for Scientific Psychology is the key text he takes it from. And the question, of course, as Adrian has already said, and as you probably already know, is the way that the infant experiences the mother in two registers, which we can very quickly, and if crudely, nevertheless somewhat validly, relate to the Lacanian imaginary on the one hand, that mirroring bodily correspondence between the infant and the mother, which is reassuring. And another dimension, das Ding, this unknown of the mother, which Lacan will, in the anxiety seminar, number 10, in a single line, also very interesting, but a single punchy line, where he says anxiety is not without an object. It has the perhaps most profound object, das Ding. That anxiety on this reading, if we take that one sentence really fully seriously, seems to say that the fundamental ground of the anxious response is in the fellow human being. And if you then take this concept and give it its full due, I think you get something like a correspondence with a huge difference to the Heideggerian Lichtung, the Heideggerian clearing of Dasein's disclosability, in which beings come to presence only in a kind of emptiness, a kind of void. The difference, of course, is really interesting and important. For Heidegger, Dasein virtually is this clearing, this Lichtung, this opening to disclosure. And therefore, anxiety for Heidegger can be defined straightforwardly in relationship to this void, where for Lacan, the void is not coincident with the subject itself, as it is for Heidegger with Dasein, but it is located in the other. It's interesting in Being and Time that Heidegger only introduces Mitsein, the being with the other, after giving his account of anxiety, as an overexposure to die Lichtung and its radical openness. For Lacan, of course, this notion, the whole problematic of das Ding, is from the very get-go, following Freud, in the other, and therefore the relationship to this anxiety and this displacement, this radical roundabout through the other, is now, we can say, really at the heart of whatever Lacan meant by saying that the desire of the human being is the desire of the other. We are eccentric to ourselves. It's all, as he says, in the first half of the ethics seminar, a problematic of not intimacy, but extimacy. One of the things I do in the book in preparing the ground for this application of the notion of das Ding to answers to the question of what is the religious is to really emphasize how das Ding becomes central to Lacan's conception of the functioning of the signifier. Here too, in the anxiety seminar, this really priceless reference discussion to the first objects, the part objects, as we're familiar with them from Freud's examples of the breast, the feces, and so on. These objects become, says Lacan, objets cessibles, seedable objects, objects which the infant can imaginatively put out between the mother and itself. In this sense, the first signifiers. And Lacan then goes on to say that the first speech, the first linguistic signifiers also are such objets cessibles, seedable objects. They perform the function of giving a kind of middle ground, a kind of axis between the child and the mother, the subject and the other, the purpose of which is precisely to manage this anxious destabilization, to give, you might say, a stabilizing point of support in the seated object. And here I take it, though Lacan, to my knowledge, never makes this direct and explicit, what he calls the paternal metaphor, the submitting of the desire of the mother to the signifier, the name of the father, can be grafted onto this whole conception. One can get the idea here that das Ding really is the master concept for Lacan's entire understanding of the subject, the other, and the unconscious. That, in any event, is the gamble I make in this book, and then turn to the question of the religious, not at all to, I shouldn't say not at all, not primarily, for sure, to say that Lacan was some kind of closet religious thinker, someone sort of in the secret moments of the dark evenings when he corresponds with his brother, the Dominican priest, Marc Francois. Lacan is not, I'm not arguing at all, a closet believer. But I wonder if he does leave a very strange and paradoxical door open, a little window, a little crack open on something like an authentic religious sensibility. That haunts the book. But I would say my main comment is simply this, that there can be an account of the religious phenomenon based on this Lacanian notion of das Ding and its imbrication in the whole dynamic of subjectivity and the relationship to the signifier, and that we can lay out, and that's the primary business of the book. I pursue that in three main quotes. Most of the book is caught up in analyses of specific religions, and Greek polytheism, Judaism, and Christianity are the three biggies. I do pay attention also to Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam in a later chapter. But there are three, each of the big Western religions, the Greek polytheistic background, Judaism, and Christianity, each takes off from a particular quote. And I'll take the quotes and then say a brief bit about them and hopefully leave good time for questions. The one about the Greeks was this. This is from the identification seminar. I'm sorry, the transference seminar. The gods are a mode by which the real is revealed, he says. An extremely enigmatic saying, particularly for Lacan. What would it mean that the real is revealed? The real is precisely what cannot be revealed. I think the answer to this and the way it relates to Greek religion is precisely that the gods are in the real, but they also, their effects anyway, do appear. When the snake coils up the trunk of the small tree and then slowly devours the bird's fledglings before the horrified crowd of kids. This is an appearance of something from another dimension, which will be determinate for our existence. And we see it. So yes, it is revealed, but its meaning remains completely enigmatic and closed to us. This, it seems to me, is the secret for understanding what Greek myth was all about. It's nothing but appearance, nothing but story, nothing but revealments, the ultimate meaning of which, however, remains opaque. So the gods never actually do step out into our sight in the Greek polytheistic outlook. They are the source of pure force, the religion of force, I call it. And like all religions, in my view, taking, I think, a genuine Lacanian concept and applying it, each of these great religions, in fact, the religious phenomenon in general, both contacts something about this real, this dimension of the thing, the unknown, but also almost inevitably creates a symptomatic reaction. In the case of the Greeks, that symptomatic reaction is precisely the Homeric hero, both in itself or himself, but also as a kind of avatar for others who are anything but heroic themselves, but they can participate in this self-assertion, even in the face of the absolute void. So that Homeric hero knows that there's no answer, that there's no knowing, there's no doing away with the ultimate void and mystery, and yet poses himself like a diamond on the black pillow of the jeweler's presentational trick here. The blackness is this real that cannot be cognized, but the imaginary symptomatic defense of the Greek posture is precisely to elevate self as risking this real, as asserting oneself in spite of it. When we turn to Judaism, another Lacanian quote gives us the key. There is never anything else at stake under the name of spirit than the signifier itself, says Lacan. Here, the really big point that I try to take and amplify from Lacan is that every signifier carries in it and delivers over into its auditors an echo of das Ding, an echo of the void in the other, and therefore the void beneath the subject itself. The signifier, therefore, always has this dimension of something unspecified about which one can always say, yes, of course, I hear what you're saying, but what are you really trying to tell me? What do you really want? This, of course, couldn't be a better point of departure for analyzing Abraham's confrontation with Yahweh, or for that matter, Moses' confrontation with the burning bush. These appearances of the divine are repetitions of the ding, the unthinkable in the other, which brings up the subject short in front of the question, the ultimate question. How then does this religion succeed giving solace and support to its adherents? The religion that is even more enigmatic for the things that transpire between Abraham and Yahweh, the outrageous and almost nonsensical demands that Yahweh makes upon Abraham, not least of which is circumcision, but the real crowning one is his threat to ask him, in fact, he simply does ask him to sacrifice Isaac. The answer to this, it seems to me, is that the very devotion to the decoding of the signifier itself becomes the great Jewish symptom. So the symptom of the Jewish people is precisely this never-ending investment in a kind of never-ending unfolding of Talmudic interpretation, that the question is repeated over and over ceaselessly about the meaning of the divine covenant. With that, one might say, with Judaism, we've arrived already at the ultimate Lacanian religion, where the complex der Nebenmensch is repeated with the law every time one asks what it means. What room is there, one could say, for Christianity? The room, I want to say, is an answer to this question, this extremely provocative question from a 1974 interview with some Italian journalists. This is also the same interview, I believe, in which he says a general theory of religion is a wastebasket proposition. It ought to be not attempted at all. He says here in the same interview, there is one true religion, and that is the Christian religion. One really almost drops one's jaw here. The question, he says, is whether this truth will stand up. I'll end on trying to give a little analysis of this sentence. The sense I make of it in this book, Embracing the Void, nice title for the purpose, is that Lacan's vision here is precisely the call of Jesus to his disciples to love not only the neighbor, but the enemy. To embrace what is threatening, what is foreign, what is precisely in the register, unthinkable and anxiety-producing of das Ding. In this sense, the divine is returned to what Freud in the project, in the complex der Nebenmensch would have said is its original locus, which is the fellow human being. The ultimately anxiety or immediately anxiety-producing stimulus is precisely the other person. But if Christianity in this way could be said to be the true religion because it now comes closest to an actual return to the scene of the crime, it also becomes the ultimate symptomatic religion. And one of the big theses of the book is Christianity really is the winner of the most symptomatic religious formation. It both comes closest to what Lacan asks for, but drops the ball most spectacularly. How so? Precisely because Christianity, unlike, I argue, Judaism, and certainly unlike Greek polytheism, turns the religious moment from encounter with love and openness for what is anxiety-producing in the other. It turns away from that and turns toward credo. It turns toward belief. It turns toward a kind of heroism, a kind of night of faith, as Kierkegaard will call it, where the problem of the anxiety-producing other is solved. Either you have the same belief I do, in which case, hey, we're okay with each other. We're agreeing tacitly there will be no thing, no unknown, threatening, anxiety-producing void. Or we don't agree, and you are an apostate. We have this, I now have, discovering that you have a different belief than I do. I now have every excuse to dismiss you, if not outright kill you. So Christianity, I argue in one big section, really here invents ideology. Christianity invents the test of belief as the kind of crucial, central point of the religious life altogether. And I argue, and I think Lacan would have echoed this in some sense, has also in the same stroke completely betrayed the real exposure to the divine in an exposure to the void in the other. I'm going to stop there. I'm already there.
Thank you. So there are two observations I want to make and see how Liebrecht, respond to them. And the first is the, I think, maybe not less important point, but the second one, and which I think is more important, is the one that might risk closing the gap and hence removing our friendship. So let me,
that one last.
Yeah, I'll take that one last. So one thing that I don't recall encountering, but it might have been there, but a number of years ago when I read the early manuscript form of Embracing Void, I don't recall coming across the observation about Heidegger's Lichtung and the contrasting of where, with Heidegger, the clearing, the openness, the void, that is, on the side of, even though Heidegger doesn't speak of subject, mind, consciousness, etc., for Dasein to avoid some baggage that those other more traditional terms carry with them, that nonetheless we can say that loosely speaking, the void is indeed the subject itself, the very clearing, the opening in which being and beings appear. Whereas you're right, for Lacan, of course, the void is located on the side of the other, following the void in the 1895 project, etc. But here, what I think is interesting is that, with your work, I mean, if you go back to, starting with your first book, Death and Desire, and Freud as philosopher, and also, this project too, that, for you, of course, that the phenomenological tradition is a constant companion of psychoanalysis and your reflections. And here I'm wondering if there is, though nonetheless, a certain really irreducible tension between phenomenology on one hand and psychoanalysis on the other. Because I think that with Heidegger talking about Dasein as Lichtung, as this clearing, that there is still a very traditional view of mindedness, consciousness, etc., as openness to the world, as the receptivity to what is out there, that in and through which we relate to what is around us. And it seems to indeed indicate that the fundamental dispositional stance of Dasein is that openness, is that receptivity, right? Whereas for psychoanalysis from the beginning, and you yourself over at dinner we were having once, and I could describe it. The psyche is like, a very sensitive microphone that suddenly, sort of dropped in the middle of a deafening, raging battlefield. And what is its response? To try and, for Freud, as quickly as possible, harden its exterior to form a barrier, to become callous and desensitized, to screen out rather than take in. And that, there's this fundamental poor defensiveness that is crucial to, I think, the Freudian and following that Lacanian, view of psychical subjectivity. That I think, in that way, it indicates perhaps a really irreducible difference between phenomenological and psychoanalytic perspectives on the very fundaments of, for lack of a better phrase, the human condition. Now, the second point. Here's where I wonder whether we can fully close the gap. And I should say too that, symptomatic of this, my description of Lacan's account of sacrifice in 7 or 10 and what I presented before Rick, one of the sources of inspiration for that description was your account of sacrifice in 7 or 10 and Freud as philosopher. And I think that, we are very close in certain ways. And to potentially close the gap and ruin our friendship, I want to suggest that, when I responded to you, I had recourse to figures such as Feuerbach and Marx. Here I could also include Hegel, since on my reading of Hegel is really, the figure Feuerbach is inspired by to then author such texts as The Essence of Christianity. And with Hegelian dialectics, when you talk about what Marx described as bringing heaven down to earth, well, whenever you do something like that, say you bring heaven down to earth, that contra garden variety of atheism, which I'm not a defender of, there are different types of atheism. But here it's not a matter of, we bring heaven down to earth and that's it, and earth just remains the sphere of the strictly secular in the way we previously conceived it. But the very status of earth is transformed too, along with the alteration of our notion of heaven now is non-existent. And when I teach, for instance, things like Feuerbach, I warn undergraduate students, Feuerbach is not just an atheist. When he talks about secular humanism, his idea is you still hold on to much of what we value in religion, a sense of awe, of wonder, of gratitude, all of these things, but now they are directed at their proper target, namely once we recognize that the secret of all theology is anthropology, we come to recognize that what we are celebrating religiously is ourselves rather than some alien other in the heavenly elsewhere, right? And if this is the case, then it seems as though the sort of atheism that acknowledges that Feuerbach's itself is not a garden variety atheism. It seems to leave open the possibility that we can hold on to much of what we value in traditional religion, but without, through a glass darkly distorting what Feuerbach calls it, friendly alienation. Of this, self-reifying, projection out of ourselves, of those features of ourselves that we then relate to as foreign, as external, as inaccessible, unknowable, etc. And so, when Lacan says that in the 1974 interview in Rome, The Triumph of Religion, he says that Christianity, of course, he says specifically Roman Catholicism is the one true religion. I mean, this can be read as just echoing figures like Hegel and Feuerbach, and also Marx too, who all say that what gives Christianity a priority in all of the world religions for them is not necessarily their Eurocentric biases, although those might still be there, but it's instead that it is the religion that gets closest to acknowledging that the secret of all theology is anthropology, because the religion is named after a central figure who is nothing other than God made flesh, right? Literally having come down to earth through the incarnation. And then, of course, with the death of Christ, things like the Chestertonian gloss on this, the Zizek runs with too, etc. So, I'm just wondering whether acknowledging that might close the gap and then, leave us free to ignore each other for the rest of our lives.
I'm not going to get away with that.
Sorry, I wasn't too long.
So I make a really brief, very brief. I'm going to try to answer both of these things with a little anecdote. And you asked, first of all, about the relation of phenomenology and Lacanian theory, which is obviously a really profound question. And then this question of what does the true religiosity really consist of? I think that, and the question of what is left of phenomenology? Well, I first think of Zizek's title, Looking Awry. That getting drawn to some detail that you didn't expect. This is, of course, the signature of the subject in many cases, and I experienced it coming down. I left the Cambria up there, and I'm coming down here, of course, not having slept all that well, and not having fed myself all that well, basically terrified. And there was a man on the in the Indian style position on the sidewalk. Poor fellow was really down and out, and I walked by and I thought, I can't do it right now. I should really. I kept going, and I now think, what an irony that I was coming to give this talk about the anxiety generated in us by the reality of the other. And here, coming down here, worried about what people are going to think of my latest wacko book, don't pay attention to this guy who's going to have a lot more than I do. And this all went through my mind as I walked on. I thought, this is the perfect example of the whole dynamic of what I'm talking about. This is Christianity in motion. I just left it back there in the dust, down to come down and tell you that's what Christianity is really all about.